Okay, so I have fully jumped, bad knees and all, on the pickleball bandwagon. I play several times a week. I've made friends, I've made enemies. Am I good? Hard to say. Height and lingering athleticism from my youth are doing a lot of work on the court. But I have a lot of fun, and a lot of that has to do with the paddles I play with. I use the Loco and the Filth from Bread and Butter Pickleball Company to destroy and or be destroyed, rarely, by opponents who, despite their knee braces, protective equipment, and AARP t-shirts, are very obviously sandbagging. It's fine, I'm over it. I'm going to be honest, I don't really care to understand the mechanics of the paddles, but I do know that Bread and Butter paddles are really high quality, the grip feels good and girthy in my hands, the ball goes where I want it to, and they look pretty stinking cool. So if you want to join the club, use promo code ROGAN for 15% off any Bread and Butter paddle. That's promo code ROGAN for 15% off any paddle on bnbpickleball.com.
How can we use the W to imagine something different? It's already so innovative in so many ways. If nothing else, I want folks to leave from listening to us talk to think about the fact we're not trying to replicate anything going on in the NBA. But there are ways that this sport is dynamic on its own. It doesn't need the comparison. Everyone can tap in. It doesn't need folks to dunk. It doesn't need folks to lower a rim. A lot of your faves can dunk. They choose not to. But if you want to watch some good basketball, right, or in some really fascinating game production, I think that's the place. But the W has a responsibility to its players and its fans to also step its game up. And it shouldn't be a Where's Waldo to figure out where to watch a game. It shouldn't be difficult for me to go into Dick's Sporting Goods and buy a jersey. It shouldn't be impossible for me to go online and be able to see a range of things. I should be able to get WNBA shorts or socks for any team at any point in the day.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to That Can't Be Right, a podcast about exploring structural wrongs, cultural oddities, and wild opinions. I am your host, Ryan Rogan. I missed you. I hope you missed me too. If this is your first time listening, please subscribe for more episodes. I have ambitious plans for the summer and the U.S. election season, so I hope you'll stick around. You can also follow along on TikTok and Instagram at TCBRPod. The first episode out of hiatus, retirement, is about the WNBA. Hopefully, lots of new fans will be paying attention to the league this summer after a very exciting college basketball season and March Madness tournament. Boy, as a longtime supporter of the league, the discourse around salaries and jerseys and ticket prices and everything that makes being a professional women's athlete and a fan of professional women's sports challenging, the things that players have been shouting from the rooftops for years has been upsetting to me and my homegirls. So excited to welcome Dr. Courtney Cox, assistant professor at the University of Oregon, who's also joined me on another episode of That Can't Be Right, discussing the Atlanta Dream, food truck fights, and Kennedy Carter. The link to that episode will be available in the show notes, or you can just scroll through your feed. Courtney, welcome back.
What's up? When you say it's upsetting me, my homegirls, it's me. I'm homegirls.
We're upset. What are y'all? Listen, to get right into it, there's a player named Caitlin Clark who has been on the Yahoo. I don't know if you've heard of her.
Is she good at basketball?
Upstart. She has played before.
Okay.
She doesn't dunk though, so I don't know if that will be interesting to people.
Yeah.
But she's been in I still go to the Yahoo homepage. I don't know why. It's a habit at this point. I'm not ashamed to admit it. But she has been a story on the Yahoo News homepage like every day for a week or so since the draft. I'm not a hater. I'm happy for her. I'm happy for the attention she's bringing to women's basketball. The point is, her salary was a topic of discussion, and people were shocked. And the thing that annoys me about that, and we can talk about this more later, is that for years, or for the last several years, people have said, why would these girls go to the WNBA? They're making more money in college. And then she goes to the WNBA and you see her salary. Why are you surprised? This is what you've been talking about for the last 3 years. Anyway, what are we talking about today? What do you think we should be talking about today? I'm calm. I'm fine.
It's going to be great. I think I could not think of a better podcast title to break down the WNBA as concept. if you are sitting at home listening, there will be many moments. We can do this as a call and response. You can just be like, that can't be right. Like that, we are going to talk about things where you are like, that actually makes no sense. But we can make it make sense. We can read it through racism, sexism, homophobia really easily. What I do in my day job is consider the role of labor and media and politics in how we understand sport. And so today, I hope we get to talk about something that's been near and dear. We've hung out, we've gone to many a WNBA game together. We can talk about maybe our moving fandom. I don't know if that's on the table. How to choose your own fandom, why I think I'm leaving the Sparks as my fandom, and then thinking about what that means. And so for me, since 2015, my research has really thought specifically about women's basketball around the world. I've traveled around the country, this one and others, including Russia and France, to study how elite women's basketball has operated, as well as like the amateur leagues that are coming up to think about the next generation of hoopers around the world. And so I'm so excited to talk about this because I love talking about this with people that are also angry about the same things, but also love the same things and are petty about the same things that I am. So I'm excited to just break it down. And, I just thought it would be cool to talk to folks that are sincerely interested in growing the game or that want to find their place, that are hopping onto this bandwagon. I think there was a lot of gatekeeping, especially like the 2010s of like who's a real WNBA fan and like all these ways of proving yourself. And so I'm living for this moment in terms of like welcoming people and saying there's some stuff we should talk about, but like I'm glad that you're here. Like you made it here, you're here finally. Doesn't matter how long it took you, you're here. But like I want to also give you the game a little bit. So when you're struggling with your WNBA League Pass, it's not your TV, and we can talk about why.
I really appreciate that framing because that's something I don't want to do. I would say over the last 2-3 weeks, recording this towards the end of April, recording this after the draft, I've just been getting so many questions from friends. Unless you're extended family, most of my family follows sports, if not closely, like at a high level. And it's just like, man, I can't believe you're asking this question. Everybody knows this. Oh my gosh. But I don't want to be that person. And then when people are talking about like Caitlin Clark's salary or rookie salaries generally, or other challenges we'll talk about as it relates to like the WNBA player experience, it's like, yes, it's a problem. Yes, we know it's a problem. Let's get more fans in the stands. Let's hold the league leadership, executives of other brands and partners accountable. So I really appreciate how you teed that up. So should we go back to the beginning a little
Well,
bit?
I'm kind of curious. I mean, not all of us have like a college basketball coach in our in our siblings like family tree. But I'm
Mhm.
I'm just genuinely curious because I think, we were both in grad school, we met each other and we were going to these
Mhm.
games together in Los Angeles. And I don't think I've ever asked you like how did you first get into women's basketball? And I'll just say like maybe basketball in general. I have some theories, but I would love to also get kind of your like villain origin story too.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it was kind of inevitable. My grandfather grew up in Indianapolis playing with Oscar Robertson, who was a legendary point guard in men's basketball. My dad played in college at Robert Morris University. My dad's a tall guy, he's 6'4". My mom's also pretty tall, like at least for a woman. She's like 5'7", 5'8". So it was me and my two older brothers. So from the jump, it was my dad taking us to his league games, his 30-year-old guy league games. I don't really remember them. I just remember like having to go. And then my going to my brother's games, and then me eventually being like, well, they play, I want to play. And me being the age where you start playing recreational basketball happened to coincide with the start of the WNBA. I always wore my hair in a ponytail growing up. So I was like, I am Cynthia Cooper. You can tell me anything. Like I had a jersey, I had the pants for Halloween one year. And I'll share it on Instagram or somewhere. But back in the day, like they would just put ads in newspapers or on the news and say, these players are going to be here. It wasn't on Instagram. It wasn't reposted to everyone's story. You just happened to see it. Um, so my mom saw that two of the Houston Comets players were going to be signing autographs at Willowbrook Mall, Memorial City Mall, somewhere in Houston, and she took us. So like even before the season started, there's a picture of like 6-year-old Ryan, 10-year-old Rodney, 11-year-old Buddy, like right with Cynthia Cooper and Tina Thompson before the season started, before we knew like those two were going to become in Houston Comets history and WNBA history. And that was really fun. And then the Comets won championships. So it was really exciting to be a fan. It was really exciting to watch. It was devastating, like when Cynthia Cooper retired, tried to make a comeback, retired again, when the team kind of dominance kind of ended and, Cheryl Swoops goes off, Tina Thompson goes off, like that core, that big three was kind of over. So I was a Houston Comets fan through and through, was really disappointed when, the recession hit and a lot of money and cash flow tightened up that caused several teams to go under. So that's my villain origin story. And then I played basketball through high school with two players you may have heard of, Nneka Ogwumike, Shanae Ogwumike. And then fast forward through college years, I meet Courtney and we're going to games in LA, WNBA finals games, WNBA playoffs games at the height of the Los Angeles Sparks, Minnesota Lynx rivalry. It was a great time. I love basketball. I would go to, my dream in life is to bring the Houston Comets back. Like, I'm going to go buy a lottery ticket today. That's I think my only chance. So
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole conversation to have about expansion. And one of the conversations I had with a friend recently was about, some of these cities, we don't need to do another poll. We don't need Kathy to ask us another time, like, where do you think we should go? It's like, that's what market research is for. That's what finding investors. That's what supporting folks that have already been doing the work to bring teams. That's what that's about. That's about doing your job. It's not about sending out some cute Instagram polls, right? And so I think the other part of it is that there are all these histories and all these teams that have folded since the W started in 1997 that, we don't need to recreate the wheel. There was a team in Orlando, right? Like, there's a team in Houston. So thinking about, like, what does it mean? Because I think also so often about how merch and branding tie in. And I'm not the one in the room with the NBA, but I think about, like, what does it mean to bring, like, vintage merch, Mitchell and Ness kind of reissues? Like, I think about the whole rollout, and you cannot tell me that Comets merch would not hit super hard right now. Beyonce would be in Comets merch. Like, imagine
for sure.
the possibilities. And so, whenever I see these lists and Houston isn't on the list, and I'm from Dallas, so I have every right to be a hater, right? But Houston should be first in line. And it just, to me, one of the big failings that I continuously saw as a fan sitting with you in my research, as I'm talking to athletes, advocates of the game, are the constant kind of missteps, missed opportunities that, it feels like there are missed opportunities in every league, but the steep drop off, right? The way that it hits, the way a recession hits a women's league is different than how it hits men's leagues that have been around for longer. All these things really matter and have impact. The same way that the orange hoodie phenomenon, right, also had a huge impact in a really important way. And so I think about these opportunities and moments that we find ourselves in. This one is just the most recent in this longer lineage of college players that could translate more fans, or exciting new possibilities, or expansion possibilities. And it's like, I'm ready to stop the Pinterest, vision boarding and actually implement something. And so I think for me, as someone that is new, I say newer as a fan, is like, I didn't grow up in, a city that had a WNBA team. I was aware of the WNBA. I've loved a range of sports all of my life. Basketball is one of definitely my top three. But one of the things for me is when I moved to Los Angeles in 2013, I started going to Sparks games kind of religiously, just because I was super curious and I was just like, I want to check this off my list. And so anytime I have an opportunity to tap into a new venue, a new sport, a new league, I love doing that. It's what I do when I travel. And then I was just so curious because once I got in there, I'd only seen the W on TV. And once I got to an actual game, I'm at a Sparks game, and I'm like, this is kind of a vibe. Why don't people understand, like, the game production, gameplay, everything is feeling good in a certain kind of way. And I was learning more about the demographics of who goes to WNBA games. I thought that was really important. And I just couldn't stop thinking about the W. It became my obsession, my dissertation, all these things. But for me, I worked for the Sparks. I interned for them on a campaign one season, and that really jump-started my, I see how it's working in the front office. I see what the issues are with the coaches. I'm starting to see, these athletes have so many things working against them, and yet they're putting out this incredible product. This is the best basketball players in the world playing. And so I think I'll continue as I, wrap up this book and move on to other things. I'm just still so invested in both like how they're organizing their labor, how they're being compensated, and how we grow the game that makes good sense to them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll jumping back to two things you said. First, going back to like vintage merch from the league. You know what would sell out immediately? A Dawn Staley Charlotte Sting jersey.
Come on.
But
Like, why isn't that already? Why aren't they pressed? Why aren't they already?
And I would buy it. I mean,
instantly.
She's had quite the moment. And this is like a random aside. I don't know if we've talked about this. Dawn's, I think part of the reason we could talk more about this, that somebody like Caitlin Clark ascended, is because you didn't necessarily have that foil as a player for the South Carolina Gamecocks. Like, it was about Dawn Staley, but not because she made it about her, like intentionally, but just because like in the way she talks, talking to the guy from that whatever outlet who was asking about trans athletes, the way she dresses, like, couple, $10,000 outfit casually on the sideline. Yeah, like not yelling at anybody. The Iowa goes up 10, 11 points, just on the sideline, cool as a cucumber in her Louis Vuitton, whatever, Gucci, whatever. But also like the WNBA game experience. What I also really appreciate about those experiences for the WNBA is that it's still like affordable family fun when things are increasingly out of range for families. Going back to the gatekeeping conversation as well, like, I want the prices to stay low selfishly for myself so I can continue to go. But if the prices have to go up to better compensate players, to create better facilities for players, create better opportunities for players to invest in more merch or whatever, that's also fine. But I still want stuff to like remain affordable for people, for normal people who are just coming to the league and can have that opportunity.
So one of the things that kind of ties in with this idea of how the league makes money. So one of the things that I think is so important is that we think about like not wanting to be like the men. The idea of, I don't hold the NBA up as a standard. One of the things I would love to get into in terms of the CBA is that, I write about the CBA. I'm very invested in how labor operates in general, but the average NBA fan does not know how their CBA works either. So I want to start from the phase of, not even being mad when people are loud and wrong about salaries. I'm like, they're loud and wrong about men's salaries too. They don't understand why people get paid so much there either. And so I think the idea of creating a new way of being, a new sports model that could still be accessible, like where it's not about the fact that the NFL has like these, $300 nosebleed seats, like not wanting to replicate that model, but to be creative and think about what a model could look like that maybe the ticket prices don't change or concessions don't change, but there are all these different ways for merch or for streaming or, especially media rights deals, which is how all the other leagues are really sustaining themselves, is about these massive media deals. And if you're constantly underselling yourself, now the W is going to step their game up supposedly and ask for more. But if you value the product, most people are going to consume it from home statistically. And so what does a league pass model look like that's more expensive? Not as expensive as some of the other ones, but more expensive. So you're bringing in more numbers. And how are you driving that? Or are you moving away from a league pass model to a full integration to a ESPN or Fox Sports or Max or whoever wants these broadcast rights deals where it's folded in and you can ask for the big, big bags, right? And then that way we still have family packs where a family of 4 can go or even buy season tickets. Like, the W is one of the last places where you can really buy season tickets without being stressed about your funds. And so, like, what are these new ways of being? I'm more interested in creating something different. If anyone has seen 144, the ESPN Films documentary that kind of covers the WNBA and the bubble, what we call the wubble, in 2020, there's a moment where Satu Sabali asks the exec committee when they all sit out, and says, well, are we going to cancel our season if the NBA cancels their season? And Sue Bird responds, we have to start thinking of ourselves as our own league. And there's this really poignant moment of like, their impact is this, our impact is this. We have to be our own league, our own selves, and do what we feel is right. And I feel that way about all these decisions that the league, the union will have to make for themselves is like, how can we use the W to imagine something different? It's already so innovative in so many ways. If nothing else, I want folks to leave from listening to us talk to think about the fact we're not trying to replicate anything going on in the NBA. But there are ways that this sport is dynamic on its own. It doesn't need the comparison. Everyone can tap in. It doesn't need folks to dunk. It doesn't need folks to lower a rim. A lot of your faves can dunk. They choose not to. But if you want to watch some good basketball, right, or in some really fascinating game production, I think that's the place. But the W has a responsibility to its players and its fans to also step its game up. And it shouldn't be a Where's Waldo to figure out where to watch a game. It shouldn't be difficult for me to go into Dick's Sporting Goods and buy a jersey. It shouldn't be impossible for me to go online and be able to see a range of things. I should be able to get WNBA shorts or socks for any team at any point in the day.
I want headbands.
Oh my gosh, you're asking for so much.
Nike Ninja headbands. If Skylar Diggins, I'm going to get closer to the mic, sorry. If Skylar Diggins brings back the headband and they are not for sale immediately following that game, I would like to have a personal meeting with Kathy Engelbert to discuss that. Because that's such low-hanging fruit.
Constantly.
Before I continue on my rant, I want to jump back to one thing you said, which was undervaluing broadcast rights. Can you speak a little bit more about that and like what happened, not what happened to the WNBA, but like what happened or why the broadcast rights were so undervalued?
So one of the things that when we talk about this relationship between the NBA and the W is at its core, at its origin, when the original business plan was written up. This is written up within the NBA to create a women's league. There was a women's league that started in 1996, the ABL, that paid its players way more. They had a completely different revenue sharing model. There was a lot more athlete agency. It was a beautiful game. So you have in 96, both like iconic Olympic team. You have UConn on one of its crazy tears. Women's basketball is having a moment at the collegiate and Olympic levels, and you have corporations that are like, why aren't we tapping in? Now, tapping in that moment, just to give you a sense, is like you have the ABL. So you go from 0 to 2 professional women's basketball leagues are happening at the same time in the mid-90s. If you think about the kind of economic flourishing that's happening in the 90s for a lot of people and not so much for others, let's be clear. You have this opportunity of massive growth. Also think about by the time we get to the late 90s, kind of how women's empowerment's working through like soccer, everything happening with the 99 World Cup. So it's a moment of explosion of people investing in women's sports in a particular way. So with the NBA deciding to start this women's league, it was automatically attached to another NBA team. So an NBA and a WNBA team operated with this. You have the same folks working on both, right? So someone that's in sales is selling both. And this is still true for teams like, for example, the Wizards and Mystics. You have the same sales execs. So based on the price and how we think about compensation for folks that are doing this on commission, you automatically early on have some disparities that start. People aren't pushing the W the same way because they get paid more commission for a higher price. So when we start that and then think about the NBA going and saying, we want to sell this, we want folks to watch on TV. And as the WNBA is starting, there are these massive crowds. Like it is a phenomenon and it's huge. It's kind of everywhere. They have a great ad campaign. We got Next. There are all these things. But automatically being tied to an NBA team already put them at a disadvantage because it's already a second kind of tiering happening, right? And then the other piece is that the early rights deals are like, where are the women? They watch Lifetime, like we're up against kind of these like really narrow understandings of how to appeal to, a different sports fan or the perception that it would need to be a different sports fan. The 18 to 35-year-old white male sports fan, there's an assumption that they will not watch the game. They're already discounting that fan. And at the same time, desperately seeing it as the only idealized fan. So what we're seeing is you have certain demographics, families, you have LGBTQ folks, you have a lot of Black dads. One of the biggest demographics I found in the W is like Black dads that coach their daughters, right? That love the girls and women's games. An untapped demographic that's just not marketed to, but they pull up and show up, right? So if we think about like these demographics that are starting to fill, there's not an expansive way of thinking of growing the game. And then we also have so much research, especially in my home field of media studies, so much research on how much it isn't being covered in terms of highlights in games. So understanding when you're watching Sports Center, it's almost like the league doesn't exist, right? Or it's pushed to the D block, E block, right? So it's pushed way down in the rundown. So early on, we have these kind of weird makeshifts like WNBA game in the middle of a Lifetime movie, kind of situation. We don't have the big scale and investment in a media rights way. And then even as we move into streaming platforms in the current era we find ourselves in, we have things like a difficult to access, use, function streaming app that's separate. And then we also have these local rights deals that are emerging, right? So part of when we talk about the confusion of figuring out, is this a national game? Is this not? Can I watch? Is it going to be on Bally's? Is it going to be on a Fox Sports local? So part of that is based on this very piecemeal way that the media rights deals started. And I think we're already in such a fractured media landscape that, even trying to find other things that are marketed or broadcast well, is sometimes a struggle. And so there's this piecemeal. If you follow women's basketball, even at the college level, there was, in 2019, 2020, iconic University of Oregon women's basketball team were on these streaming sites that you had to pay insane amounts of money for. And they should have been nationally televised, right? And so we had all of these top 25 Pac-12 matchups that were like being relegated to either Pac-12 network or a streaming site that no one had. So that's always been a fraught issue for women's sports and really any emerging league. But I think it's even more so when we have so many options and so many ways to know how to access other sports and not this one.
That's been my experience 100%. Like even as a fan who like considers herself in the know, finding a game, figuring out what app I need to open, what login I need to use, and then logging on to find out it's blacked out in my area where I don't even have a team in my region. I mean, Dallas is in Texas, but it's like, I'm just trying to watch the Sparks or the Mystics or whoever play. It's been really frustrating. So hopefully some of that can be reconciled in new deals, I think, as they go back to like kind of the negotiating table and just making it also just easier. In addition to getting, what they're worth, also make it easier for fans. That's something we went to visit my grandparents last summer in Indiana. We went to an Indiana Fever game. Won't see those prices this summer for what we paid. But the biggest thing is that when we got home, maybe the day or the day after, we wanted to watch the next game and we couldn't get it, like in Indiana. So it's really frustrating. Can you speak more about the relationship with the NBA and how newer teams have kind of developed without having maybe an anchor to an NBA franchise?
Yeah. So, in the broader kind of history of this relationship, the NBA and WNBA, there was a president of the WNBA, but they were still housed under the commissioner. So David Stern was someone that historically, from what people have told me, was just very, very big on creating a women's basketball league. Obviously did not talk to him before he passed. And so I can't speak to that personally, but was really invested in this and was a commissioner of both. So we think from the top tier. And if you are ever looking on the NBA website at careers, there are a lot of jobs that are still NBA and WNBA and G League. Like everything's attached together. And so those positions will have to do marketing, branding, rules, whatever the job is, officiating. These positions in New York at the headquarters typically have a mixture, right? So there's a way that there's not this kind of agency of the W to be its own thing. It's still housed within this larger framework. I bring that up because there was a point after the league got started where teams could choose to sell their W team, right? And those teams could be independently owned. What we end up having is this mixture. So some teams agree to do that, some don't. This changes over time. Then when we think about, you mentioned the recession, we think there's this collapsing really that's happening in the mid 2000s amid all of these financial crises. If you think about the average owner, how they got their money, how they got their millions and billions, this impacts them as well. What's the first thing they're going to let go? It's going to be their W team, because they've already decided the narrative discourse, these are not profitable. I'll cut my losses. Paula Madison does this with the Sparks at one point, where she says, I've lost I think she said $12 million. Like, I'm letting this team go. I'm cutting my losses. And so these narratives and discourses of the WNBA not being worth anything, not being valuable, a lot of these discourses start with the folding of teams that weren't being covered by local journalists anyway, that weren't getting the rotation, that weren't even being seen. So like you said, I go and have an amazing experience. I'm locked in. I'm invested. I'm ready to learn more. I'm ready to watch more. Where do I go from there? What do I do if I don't live in a market where I can go and have season tickets? What does support look like? So a lot of these questions start to circulate. So this break off of certain teams, so some are independently owned, and I use the Wizards and Mystics as one kind of relationship that still exists. So what happens, one of the important things that we have to think about, you and I have experienced this together for sure, is that when you have this relationship, whether it's about a co-ownership or if they just share the same venue, the other thing we have to think about is who gets bumped from venues, what resources are available that are specific to one team. What does it mean? It's really great for some folks. When I worked for the Sparks, it was really great that some of the sell of getting folks in for a Sparks game was that they could go see the Staples Center for cheaper than a Lakers or a Clippers game. But on the other side of that is what happens when one of these or both of these teams are making a playoff run that coincides with the start of the WNBA season. I've gone to WNBA preseason games in like Long Beach and like
the Pyramid. Yep.
Working at the Pyramid tonight, as it were, right?
Yes.
I've gone to playoff WNBA games at the Galen Center, right?
USC,
In USC, where USC plays, right? And so even when we think about what this means, there's always this second tier status when it comes to resources, when it comes things like the venue, the locker room, all these things. If there's a concert, if there's all these things, who is the first to get bumped out of these spaces? What does it mean to play a home game and you're not at home?
Right.
So thinking about that relationship is about venues, it's about ownership, it's about prioritization. And it ultimately also has to do with the haves versus have-nots sometimes that emerge, where maybe an independently owned team might have more investment in their team versus someone that's tied to, an ownership group that has both, or vice versa. It can actually help or hurt in both directions, the additional focus or not. So the Sparks are not owned by the Lakers ownership group, but they are owned by the same ownership group. The majority owners are the same as the Los Angeles Dodgers. That was not always the case. That's currently where we are, right? And so thinking about what it means when there is investment or not, or when new ownership comes into an NBA franchise that then has the attachment of a W team, do they have that same investment, right? So these questions, it's an unevenness that rocks this league, but you feel it so much more when you're thinking about only 12 teams, right? You feel every impact of every ownership switch that much more, it hits that much harder. When I think about the Liberty being, temporarily pushed out, MSG is the same kind of thing. I think about Staples, artist formerly known as Staples Center, now crypto.com. There was a point where we had WNBA games being played in this leaky gym, outside of New York. And
Westchester? Westchester
yeah.
Community Center
You have to get on the
something?
train. Yeah. So there's a Westchester stop, the idea of this movement and being moved in and out also affects things when we talk about things like expansion. I know I'm super, super rambling and making all these connective dots, but none of these things happen in isolation. So that's why even when we talk about expansion, one of the conversations, I live in Portland currently, one of the conversations that's happened with Portland is like, well, what's going to happen? Will they be able to play at Moda Center? Anytime there's a moment where there's renovations happening, where an NBA team plays, they do it in the summer. And so that's when the WNBA team. So this is kind of the issue whenever these renovations, you're going to end up in a Westchester kind of gym where then we have bigger health and safety questions to ask too. It's not just about, will fans go out to Westchester or to the Pyramid or wherever, these disparate places we're asking these athletes to play in. But it's also about like, how do we sustain a future of that? And so I've been really interested in teams like the Wings or like the Aces that have their own venue. I mean, the Aces are creating an entirely new kind of standard for the league, which is really exciting. But what does it mean that the Wings play somewhere differently from the Dallas Mavericks where they don't have that same threat? And so that's something I think we have to think about too, and kind of make those demands of the league as well to have their own prioritization of these players and teams.
100%. And just like add a little more context to the Westchester conversation, we talked about it as an explanation. New York Liberty played at Madison Square Garden. Was it just for like a summer or two, or just one summer they did that?
Oh, this is a good question. We can follow up on.
Anyway, James, who is it? James Dolan
Mhm.
was like, I mean, kind of going back to how some of the owners Courtney mentioned just considered this like not a great investment, just a money, kind of a money pit, not profitable. I think James Dolan arguably took the same tone by one hiring Isaiah Thomas to be involved with the New York Liberty after he had been accused of bad things. And then the team played in Westchester. And again, it was if you've played high school basketball at a school with more than 1,000 students, you probably played in better facilities. Since then, New York Liberty have been purchased by billionaire. They play at Brooklyn. They got in trouble for flying the team on chartered flights to like different events. So that just goes into the ownership conversation. And we can talk a little bit more once we talk about compensation, how, the investment and attention from the ownership group influenced free agency in the WNBA offseason. Did you have any information on Westchester?
Yeah, so they played there 2 seasons, 2018 and 2019.
It was that recently?
Yeah.
It felt like so long ago. Who was
Yeah.
on that team? Like Tina Charles? Was that a Tina Charles New York Liberty team?
Yeah. Yeah, because that was so if you think about the lineage for folks listening that are familiar, if you think about the lineage of these key moments, so 2015, 2016, I would say like 2018, 2019, these are kind of these key markers in what's happening. Where there are, when you talk about the Yahoo homepage, right? So 2015 is the year we have Brittany Griner, Glory Johnson, their altercation. And it's kind of question of like, the WNBA doesn't have a domestic violence policy. Maybe we should think about that. Something that also is a good thing we should probably keep bringing back into the CBA because things continue to happen. We have 2016 where not only the good guys won, but also just thinking about, what protests looked like in the WNBA before Colin Kaepernick took his first knee, that there was already protests, Tina Charles being part of what was happening in New York. But across the WNBA, before we get to 2020 and kind of another heightened moment of their activism, 2016 was also there this summer, again, before Kaepernick took a knee. We have all of these forms of protest happening following the killing of Philando Castile, Alton Sterling. Minnesota's doing stuff, Phoenix is doing stuff, New York's doing stuff. So I just want to also take that moment to acknowledge, like, all the things you see about these athletes who are dynamic and outspoken and so smart and brilliant and have an activist, like, kind of politic about them is like, none of this is new either. They've always been about that action. And so I think about that of like, what does it mean that you're doing these protests and then being fined? And then only when we go on the internet and say, that can't be right, are those fines rescinded, right? And so I think about all of that. And then you get to 2018 and you're playing in a 2,000 capacity gym, right? And so, one of the things that I'll say is that it also makes very plain what labor practices are like for men who are playing in the G League, right? Maybe there's this other question, because they're also, a lot of them are playing overseas as well. They're circulating their labor in a particular way. And so what I want to acknowledge is that when we see disparities happen, there's normally someone else that's going through that too. And I think everyone should have ability to play in a safe, just when we think about things like air conditioning, we think about things like leaks, like
Yes.
we think about like locker room affordances. We think about everything from sports medicine, athletic training to data collection. All these things are things that we have to think about at every level of the game. When we see these amazing crowds at the D1 level for March Madness, for conference tournaments, I want to talk about D2 and D3. And so when we talk about growing the game and the growth of women's basketball, I really am interested in like all phases of what that looks like. When I talk about athlete labor, I'm interested in like all phases. So I get so frustrated about these kinds of things because these to me are, if we're going to do this, if you're going to own a team, it is your responsibility. And we know, again, if we think about what Donald Sterling was doing with the Clippers and having them work out like at community colleges, like this is how power works, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the things that we're seeing in the W have happened in the NBA, they have happened in the NFL, all these things, right? But I want to think about what 2024 means, what it means for these things to happen in this moment, or what it means for us to be like, oh, that just happened, 2018, 20, like that
Yeah.
was a recent occurrence. And so the outrage I think people feel when they see the salaries is not that athletes haven't been paid like these low kind of wage, but in their brains are like, well, that's what happened in the 1940s with the NFL, right? They're like, we're past that, but we're not past that for so many athletes who have to find other jobs, have to have a million businesses, have to have 10 influencer things. That's labor too. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
really into folks that are here now that are interested in asking those questions, because there's not easy answers sometimes, but it's really easy to pinpoint what's going on when we're talking about things like chartering flights, for example, or having your own hotel room, a new novel concept in this latest CBA.
You teed it up perfectly. Let's talk about the CBA, because you've alluded to like being interested in how players are organizing their labor. This CBA was pretty impactful, was widely discussed. The players were really excited. There were a lot of different changes to compensation, to benefits relating to pregnancy, fertility, travel.
Hmm.
That's like from my perspective, like reading headlines and reading some different documents. But what were the highlights and the important things that you saw in that CBA? And then what are some of the things you also noticed were absent?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things I learned in the process of even negotiating, there's an amazing Players Tribune piece written by our fearless leader, Neka Gumake, the president of the Players Association. And it's called Bet on Women. And it lays out, this idea that people are like, y'all are greedy, y'all are asking for too much, all this stuff. But then there's a layout of what the asks are. And some of the things they were really advocating for, when you mentioned things like, things for parents, whether we're thinking about freezing eggs, we're thinking about IVF, whether we're thinking about maternity leave, right? Parental leave, all of these things, right? Not perfect. There are issues. We'll get to those in a second. But at the time, the things they were asking for were happening because there was a realization that the partners of NBA players had better reproductive health benefits than these professional athletes. And I make this comparison only for the reasons that I've talked about, in terms of having a commissioner in that title. A commissioner of the WNBA is a newer phenomenon. There used to be a president. Lisa Borders was president, right? So thinking about these innovations, this becomes really important to think about these comparisons. If we're on the same health insurance, we're under the same umbrella. How is it someone's girlfriend is going to have better access than this athlete who is literally using their body as their labor, and then also
Mm-hmm.
going into labor, right? This idea of being able to do both. So the asks were about issues related to health, safety, this duality in terms of thinking about what are these opportunities. Before, there were a limited number of opportunities for folks to stay stateside. The majority of players, as people might have discovered during Brittany Griner's detainment in Russia, that the majority of the W's players played overseas in the off season. So what we consider typically basketball season in this country, right? Fall going into late spring. They would be playing overseas in Russia, Turkey, China, three of the highest paying leagues are in those countries. They would go there and come back. So they played year round. And then if you're on a national team, some of them have dual citizenship, some of them are competing for Team USA. It is a nonstop, constant wear and tear on your body. So what protections you have, what abilities you have to be able to just work out, to sustain your body in the off season, to be able to have kids in an off season, if there is an off season for you, all these things become intertwined and really important. So some of the considerations for travel were about kind of if-then situations. If this happens, then we could use a charter, or playoff kind of situations, all these things. So it's really important to think holistically. One of the things I thought was so important was that so many of the issues that I saw that they were fighting for, things like freezing your eggs, for example, when you do have to wait until you finish playing to have kids. So many of those things are some of the same issues I see with people in my age. I'm in my mid 30s. The same issues we have with our own labor of wanting to be
Mm-hmm.
able to have access to these kinds of health benefits, right? to be able to be taken seriously as someone that wants a career and maybe wants a family. And so I think a lot about that in terms of NECA is always thinking about it being bigger than the W. It affects things like women's hockey. It affects things like women's soccer, U.S. women's national team. It affects me, someone that works in academia. Like, how the W is organizing their labor has ramifications for so many of us. That's why I think it matters, is that I see these are leaders. These are degreed, really educated folks who have traveled the world and have seen a lot of stuff. And we get to learn from them all the time. And they happen to be really good at hooping. Like, what are the chances? How is there this wealth, these riches? And then how are we making these tall athletes sit in these middle seats? So thinking about this idea of having to upgrade yourself, I'm not going on a work trip. I am 5'4". I know my voice, the reach, my bravado gives you 5'7", 5'8" minimum.
At least.
I don't sit in middle seats when I travel for work. I just don't. Can you imagine? Because this is a reality. We have BG sitting in a middle. What? I got to pay to go up from economy to business. I got to pay for a first class. So the idea of these things all kind of having this intricate relationship to how folks are able to compete on the floor, some of them year round, in and out, all of these things matter. And so for me, I think that the CBA did really important measures in some ways when we think about for parents, right? But I think that travel continues to be a lingering kind of issue that continues to be a problem we have to reckon with. Not because we have teams that have the money to charter, but the idea that the league says this is an equity issue, I'm like, so we have to talk a little bit more about what that means. The other thing I'll say that is a huge thing that I know will be part of this next CBA, I've already heard, Kelsey Plum, who's first VP of the exec board of the Players Association, talk about this, but other folks have as well, is that people don't understand how revenue sharing works. And that's okay. It's okay.
It's okay for sure. Yeah.
It's okay. Most of us don't know how our own labor is organized at our own jobs, if we're being very honest. It's a great opportunity. But athletes their labor is on display in a way that we are talking about. We talk about things like free agency. We talk about things like trades. We talk about things like strikes in a way we don't talk about a lot of other industries. Except for, more recently, we've been having these moments with Amazon, with Starbucks, with, the writers strike, all these things. Like
automobiles.
Yeah. And so we're having an important moment to talk about labor, which is exciting for me. But one of the things I'll say, when players are talking about revenue, when players are talking about making more, they are not saying they want to make as much money as Kyrie Irving. What they are saying is that the NBA has a collective bargaining agreement that has a 50-50 revenue sharing model. So those big broadcast deals, that matters, merch deals, sales, all these things, ticket sales, all these things. When we talk about revenue sharing, these are the things that divide up to make some incredible compensation for these athletes. So what we have now, people assume is a 50-50 model in the W. The latest CBA is an incremental 50-50 revenue sharing split. Incremental is the key word here. 50-50 is kind of not. Because one of the things, the quickest way I can explain this is that incremental is based off meeting metrics, right? We made this much last year. These are our benchmarks. We need to make this much. And then if there's no extra, there's nothing to share. If there is extra, we go through a couple of rounds of this. So I think 30% of that in the CBA, of the extra, if it goes above these preset markers, that extra revenue, if it's in the negatives, again, no one gets anything. If it's zero, no one gets anything. But of that goes above those incremental annual markers, you then first have to give 30% to cost to revenue, which is this general kind of bucket. So we're then talking about 70% of the extra money. And then, so we're splitting that 35, now that's 70. And then of that, players split half of that becomes their compensation. So there's a lot of if-thens happening. If we make more money than we anticipated, Then we will split that after we pay back any kind of revenue related costs that we need that are functional admin kind of costs. And then we split this extra money. So when people are chiding each other, people that have never watched the WNBA are on the internet saying, y'all better be out there buying if y'all are serious and y'all are complaining about these salaries, y'all better be out there buying these t-shirts. And I'm like, first of all, have you tried to buy a t-shirt? Is it of a franchise that is currently functioning? And is it in an inclusive sizing kind of spectrum? These are questions. But when they're like, you better be buying League Pass, you better buy the stuff. But it's like, you also better be pushing the WNBA to change that setup, to change the revenue sharing model. And so part of it is, if the WNBA had to do more revenue sharing, they'd probably be a little more invested in charging a little more for some of these broadcast deals. They probably would be out here printing more jerseys. They probably will be doing something different. And so my thing is, where are the pressure points, right? Because these kind of sharing models with more revenue, more things coming in, and a bigger split, we can have different conversations of things like chartering flights. We can have different kind of things. It's true that you do need to support the W in order for it to proliferate and for us to have more expansion. But also, you're going to fall in love with someone at a training camp that's not going to make a team because there's only 12 teams and because the current salary structure and the salary cap is not going to do them any favors. So it's a little more complicated than if y'all would just go to the games or if you would just pay for League Pass. Those are important steps, but understanding what percent of that money is going to touch someone's bank account is also important.
First question is, what does it look like to try to put pressure on the WNBA or hold the WNBA accountable for like creating better deals and opportunities for players? What does that look like as a fan?
I mean, I think bullying works, to be honest with you. It's the only thing that I've seen successfully work. When I mentioned in 2016, when players were advocating within the movement for Black Lives, when they were fined for their activism, even as the NBA was celebrated for their I Can't Breathe Instagram, posts and stuff, right? So the inequalities continue to persist, right? What Black women and non-binary folks are doing in the W is apparently something you can only do in the NBA. Those are the only activists we can celebrate. So one of the things I think is important is when I saw how quickly folks that had no interest in basketball or women's sports, any of that, saw this and saw this is wrong. Everyone starts tweeting at the WNBA, and eventually it gets resolved, right? So that's the first thing. Like, Lisa Borders has to step back and handle that. But I also want to point out Lisa Borders as a Black woman. Like, I also want to talk about how, like, when we talk about racism, sexism, like, Black, our girl Ruha, Black faces in high spaces is not going to save us, right? Fans do have a voice, and in this hyper visible moment, the WNBA might try to act right this season. I hope so. They're already doing things like moving to bigger venues for these games. I don't think it should just be about when the Indiana Fever are coming to your city, because that's a short-sighted thing. That's about still trying to make a certain kind of star of the league that is an accessible, like, white woman for people to consume, right? When we know the majority of the league, over 80% of the WNBA is Black, right? So what does it mean that we're still replicating these models of who can be the star, who can be the face? A problem. The other side of this is thinking about, if we're only thinking about that expansion, right? Bigger arenas, more tickets, proliferation in an important way. Instead of thinking, how do we grow it all at the same time? How do we get to 16 teams, right? We need 16. There are enough talented folks. I've seen it. I've gone to Athletes Unlimited the past 2 seasons. Like, there is enough talent to have 16 teams without even blinking, right? If you look at transactions on the WNBA website, again, for folks that enjoyed watching the draft, it's fun. The fits are incredible. It was a scene. It was a movie. We're going to be looking for those folks next month. And I regret to inform you, right, that those folks will have signed an overseas contract. They will have to figure out another way to be. They will figure out hopefully a fantastic coaching gig, something that works for them, because there are not enough spots. And as the salary structure looks right now, there are not enough teams. There are not enough teams, and there are not enough roster spots on each team to expand enough. There are so many folks that I know could come off the bench for these teams. but there are not roster spots allotted. So these are the CBA concerns we have to keep thinking about: expansion of roster spots, expansion of the league itself, and then what kinds of affordances are we going to do to make sure that athletes are as safe, happy, healthy as they can be. Because that's the last thing I want is anyone to get injured, overuse, anything, because they were on a Southwest flight that had 3 stops so they could get to Dallas.
Well, first, let me say, yes, if you were to look at the WNBA roster right now, most of these teams coming out of the draft earlier this month have 15 to 18 players on their roster headed to training camp. That has to be down to 12. So if 12 teams are cutting 6 people, it's going to get crazy. But I do wonder, do you think there will be more pressure from the chief marketing officer for your team, for your league, to keep some of the exciting players on rosters?
Like, is there like a backroom kind of conversation of like,
I know you want to cut, just using a name. I'm just using a name, folks. Nobody come for me. You don't want to keep Angel Reese on your roster.
I mean,
the Chicago Sky.
I mean,
Chicago
yeah.
Sky
So,
said,
but let's think about this. Let's take the Sky, for example, right? Exciting draft. How do you keep them both? In what world is it possible? And this is also, I mean, free agency is weird in the W in a way that if you're used to watching free agency in the NFL or NBA, it just moves differently because there is a rigid kind of notion of people are pinching pennies, people are trying to Tetris their way through. And then you have to think about like what's going on in the draft. So there's the arrangements that happen near the beginning of the season are to me more interesting because it's about final puzzle pieces, or we have room for one more, or this person just got cut, we could grab them. So it's like I think there's something interesting because everyone would assume in sport, if you've watched this in other leagues, you're a first rounder, you're good. Like you're fine. You're set.
You might be a bust, but you're on the team.
You got time to prove there is no time. This league is so cutthroat. And so I guess maybe my thought is the marketing person going to step in? Who can say? I don't know how those back channels work because I see Cam and Angel as stars. I see them as incredible, and they bring such different stuff. Like I'm just so excited that I want to say there's going to be someone that hits the Buffalo Wild Wings button and it's just like, we got to figure it out. We got to keep them, you know? Like that's my hope, but I have no idea. Like I'm curious myself how this will end up shaking out, and will there be enough outrage, right? That expansion happen. You cannot have 13 teams, first of all. It's weird and lopsided, and selfishly would love for it, the 14th to be Portland, but I think the rollout for expansion has been terrible so far. Unsurprising if you've been watching anything Kathy and her goons do, but I do think that
I wasn't ready for the goon part.
Because what is happening? I still have questions about what happened with the original kind of Portland setup, right?
I have questions about, to jump in. I have questions about when they were like posting about the Connecticut Sun playing one game in Boston. I thought that post was about Connecticut moving to Boston, like permanently. It was so poorly worded and announced, and that's just another example of Kathy and the Goons, which I would actually love to be the title of this episode, but like I need better SEO probably. But continue.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like how things are working there, the inner workings, the lack of transparency, and this to me was the Bay Area problem. If folks remember, Elena Beard was part of an Oakland-based investment group that had been trying to bring a team there. And then everything that ends up happening with like Chase and like all the, like this is what's going to happen with this team. It just felt like a whirlwind of lack of transparency for me. Maybe it's my own kind of lack of knowledge of how one buys a team. But I would like to know the process where you end up with just one team versus two, right? And in the WNBA, if you're not familiar, under the current playoff setup, Eastern versus Western Conference matters a lot less than it used to, but it's still weird to have that one kind of hanging team. To me, it makes sense to bring I would love to see an incremental expansion where you bring in two teams, team 13 and 14 in together, and then bring a 15 and a 16 in together. I'm not advocating that we just throw 4 teams together. I think it has to be intentional. I think the rollout has to be right. I think community partnerships, I've learned a lot from the NWSL and the MLS kind of rollouts that I've seen in different cities. I think LAFC is a great example, and Angel City are 2 great examples of new franchises that come in and really get a buy-in from the city. And so I would love to see an intentional partnership building kind of thing with, Bay Area, Portland, Houston. And I don't know, I have a couple ideas about what a fourth, team would look like.
Lay it on us right now.
I think regionally, like what I think regionally, in terms of like, okay, I want something else that's kind of east, to be added on because we have so much. If we add Portland, Bay, and then we get kind of central south, like adding Houston, and so part of me would love a Nashville or a Memphis team. I think Tennessee would be a great, not only thinking about the relationship to college, the relationship like thinking about like SEC, ACC, like just kind of covering folks there a little bit. I think that could be kind of cool. And then I also think about what it might mean for like a Philly team. I think Philly would be a cool place to revisit. Orlando is also, people have tried to talk me into Orlando. Not my place, but if you think about family fun, like I do think Orlando, I think Disney, I think there's some partnership potential for Orlando versus a Miami. I actually don't think Miami would be a good call, but I do love maybe Orlando. I love girlies not paying the state income tax. Like I think there's some potential there. And I think about Tennessee, similar kind of manner. So I think about cost of living under these salaries, and then which is why I chose Philly versus Boston,
Boston.
And also Boston. I'm not
Yeah.
sending the faves there, but I do think Philly is such a fun sports city, and they would definitely support a team in a way that I think could be so amazing. So Philly would probably be my fourth expansion team. What are yours?
I'm with you on those. I think I am not as excited about a Portland team because, my feelings about Portland generally, it's great for the not for me. Of course, Houston. So what do we got? Houston. I'd be cool with Philly. I don't know how I feel about Memphis because my brother used to live in Memphis and it's fine. But they do have like a lot of issues with like infrastructure that can cause problems. And like, I don't know what would happen like in the summer or something if there were like any really bad inclement weather. So Houston, Philly. I'd kind of like to see the Charlotte Sting come back. But if we need we can't just keep going back to old places. Houston, Philly.
Well,
Do we need
the Bay
another?
is a lock now, so
Okay,
that
yeah.
one counts. Yeah.
Do we need anything in the mid? Do we need anywhere else in the Midwest? I don't think so.
I don't. I do not think so. And this is no disrespect, obviously, to the Midwest, but I do feel covered. I do feel covered.
Yeah, I'd say Nashville. I would say Nashville over Memphis if
Okay.
we were going in Tennessee, and then Portland. I think, but Portland would also be good. And going back to your comments on like community building, I would love a team in Philly to get a Abbott Elementary cameo. Like that would be the dream.
Yeah.
The dream. I want to take like 2 steps back on 2 different things. One, you mentioned timing of the player experience of like getting drafted, training camp, maybe or maybe not making a roster. Can you tell us like how short of a window that is for these players to make a best impression in these teams to like make a decision about their rosters?
Yeah, I mean, not that I have been in the room where it happens, like, not that I've just sat in, like, a war room, been like, "We're cutting these players." But everything I'm about to say comes from doing field work and then from living on the transactions page,
Mm-hmm.
which folks can go back and kinda look and kind of see a little bit of a history and kinda see how quickly these things can happen. So the first thing I'll talk about is timing in terms of from you being drafted as a rookie to, like, playing, right? So when I worked for the Sparks, I was tasked with taking around one player to all the media day stuff. So think about everything you see on the Jumbotron, the fun kind of games they do, all the like make some noise, like all that stuff, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
also like sitting down for their first kind of press conference in camp, right? So I was assigned to a rookie, Sierra Burdick, one of the last kind of Pat Summit classes, amazing athlete. And so she'd been drafted. I'm going around with her, and she's already talking about her overseas contract. She's already talking about the fact she signed in Italy. So she knows in the fall where she's going. So before she has played 1/4 of WNBA basketball, she's already signed a contract to play in Naples, right? So I just want to first set the table with, like, as excited as you are to finish college and start your professional career, you're already having to think about that kind of stuff, right? Then you have to think about, like, not fully unpacking anywhere because you might get cut, like within the first couple of weeks, right? And then you might also be shipped somewhere else or headed back home. And also you just graduated from college, right? And so your life is a little bit of a whirlwind. If you think about the time we saw, like, the week between, like, the tournament ends, the championships there, then the draft, you're still in school for a lot of folks. In school, I mean, it's kind of from late February on. Are you even in school?
Right.
But I'm a college professor, y'all. I've seen it. It's are kids learning anything? I don't know. So anyway, from that time forward, you're in this kind of preparation mode. But we have this league that starts in May. So everything just happens so quickly that I just want to emphasize that someone getting cut and having to figure their lives out happens in a whirlwind of a time where, athletes that got drafted in LA end up playing for a season in New York inexplicably. Like, someone else gets cut, they get picked up, they play there, then they go play overseas, then they come back and maybe try to make a different team. And so these aren't typically for folks coming in long-term salaries, right? And so you're fighting for your life in that first kind of couple of years, because the other thing that's different is that I saw a lot of, before this new kind of prioritization clause kind of goes into effect, one of the things I also saw was, you're playing for a team. I would talk to a player that was playing for a team but knew that they were going to play the first few games until the star player came back from their season in Turkey or some of these overseas leagues that play a little longer. So you survive training camp, you start playing, and even in that moment, you're probably still about to get cut because you're just a placeholder until their star athlete on a max salary, max contract comes back. And so that person is just plug and play because they've been playing for that team. And so you have this notion, there's this impermanence for so many players, right? We see the top names, we know they get to be in all the commercials, all the things. But for so many players, every season is a grind in a certain kind of way on their bodies, playing against the best, right, in the world. And then they go out into the world and play some more people. And then when you're the American that is playing overseas, you're paid more, but you're also expected to be the star of the team and score all the points and hold your man to zero. Like, so I think part of it is that constant grind, that constant expectation is part of it. And so this new prioritization clause will change transactions a little bit, because under this, you are penalized if you are missing camp, if you aren't. So it's about stabilization, where the prioritization is, for some folks, that means I can't go play in XYZ country, right? Not, I was going to say that people aren't playing in Russia or Israel as they were before, but, thinking about what that means, right? And the geopolitics of where people are playing, as I say, that very big aside, is also really important. And so folks are coming back and they're just immediately going into a regular season. And so you also have seasoned vets that don't have any breathing room or time to get acclimated, to settle in with a new team and new players, because they're coming directly from playing overseas.
Yeah. It's all such a crazy timeline. As I was preparing for this episode, like, I knew it's been crazy. I knew if you're playing in that Final Four, maybe even the Elite Eight, it's like you have 24 hours after your last game to decide whether or not you're going to do this. And then you're going to the draft 7 days later. Training camp starts about 10 days after that. Preseason starts about a week after that. And then the regular season starts about another week after that. And so all of that potential for change, like, whew, I can't imagine.
And Olympic training, and then I was this year. It was happening in Cleveland. Like that, all this stuff is happening, and these decisions are being asked, right? Of Angel, of Caitlin, like instantly, like, okay, tell us decide your entire life right now.
Right. decide. It's an exploding offer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Either you go or you go back for another year. And what does that do to your draft value?
Yeah.
We saw some people that maybe kind of tanked theirs, not tanked, but lowered
Mm-hmm.
their draft value in the last season. Hopefully, returning for another year can help them. Salaries overseas.
Mm.
How are they so much higher?
So one of the things, so we're talking about non-unionized labor. It's a little
Mm-hmm.
different. And the pay discrepancies on a team. So how much foreign players typically, depending on the league that you're in, like Euro League, for example, you can have like 3 not, foreign players. Typically, folks want to bring Americans, but there are other folks from other countries that are also joining in. This also incentivizes things like dual citizenship because you don't pay taxes at the same bracket if you also have a second passport. And they can bring in another American because you count as an insider, right? You count as a local. So I say that to just set a table of like how much you get paid depends on a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
Not all leagues are created equal. And even within a league, there are the haves and have-nots, right? They're the equivalent of the Yankees, right? And like their budget, right? And thinking about what's happening. And so when you, if you're playing for the Yankees or the Ferrari of your particular league, the money they can offer you is nuts. The facilities can be incredible, all the things. If you listen to The Spy Who Signed Me, the 30 for 30 podcast, you can hear about what was happening. I went to Kazan, Russia in 2018, and I was within that same league that they're talking about, but I was with a team that had a smaller budget, right? But they still had to pay. They had to play Kursk. They had to play UMMC. They had to play the big boys, right? But
Mm-hmm.
they did not have the same budget or resources. And when I say that, there was no team trainer. They taped their own ankles. There was a masseuse that was like with the team. But I'm giving all the gems from my book right now. But like the
Mm-hmm.
way that health and safety moved for them, the way that resources and money moved for them was really interesting because you are getting paid well. But like one of the US players on the team that I followed had talked to her coach about insomnia. Like, I'm not sleeping, I'm not doing well. And he's like, just drink a beer before you go to bed. Like, that was his thing, was like, just drink before bed. Like, that is not sound medical advice for an athlete that's expected to compete at the highest level and score all the points, right? They're eating like baked beans before games. Like, I mean, it's just like, this is not every place's experience. It's not every Russian team's
Mm-hmm.
experience. So I want to just talk about like what a team says to you and what a team promises to you versus what you get there. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
a piece where like Essence Carson's talking about that you get there and your apartment doesn't even have Wi-Fi, but they told you it was going to have all these things and do all this stuff, right? So what's the dream? Some folks have told me about playing in countries, and this is both men and women that play overseas have told me about getting somewhere and the checks are not coming on time. So you might sign a beautiful 6-figure salary contract, but then they're like, oh, sorry, the direct deposit didn't hit. Or they might say, we'll only pay you in a Russian bank account and you got to figure out how to pay your mortgage with Bank of America, right? So those constraints are also some of the things that I talk about in my book, but also I think are important to note is that it's not that it's just like easy peasy. I go over to this other country, whoop de whoop, it's chill, it's fine. It's actually like there are all these extra things. I need an agent that understands the international contracts that I'm signing. So all these different considerations are really important to think about where, yes, we have seen these extremes of someone like Brittany Griner getting detained and being caught up in this geopolitical kind of landscape. But there's all these everyday harms and risks that athletes are taking on that I think is still so important. And what was really interesting to me being in the field is that, while BG was detained and is in a prison camp, I'm overseas with athletes that are like, it's wild, but I still have to come do this. I still have people I got to feed. I still have stuff I got to do. And so they know that risk. They already knew it before. And they're living under the fact that, I'm talking to athletes that have played with and against BG, internationally, in college, in the W. And they're like, this is someone I really know and really rock with. And everyone's just kind of using it as a talking point, right? So we have these moments like with Angel and Caitlin or with BG where it's like, these athletes are not read as people typically do with athletes. But on top of that, they're not seen as people that are really fighting for their livelihood and to pursue something that they love. So how are people paid? Sometimes it's gambling. Sometimes it's mob money. There's a lot of different ways that leagues are funded. So I don't want to give a
Mm-hmm.
blanket kind of statement. Sometimes it's sponsorship in various forms that
Mm-hmm.
allows them. So it really varies from team to team, not only country to country, in terms of what they can offer. But they do stack their salaries in a way that is because of non-unionized labor as well. And also the penalties that they impose if you leave early are wild. I've heard of folks having to pay, $20,000, $30,000 if they don't complete the season. So those contracts are also really sticky in terms of how
Mm-hmm.
they write them for foreign athletes, where they know they might get over there and realize, oh, I actually don't want to be here. And so even when I
Mm-hmm.
hear how players have tried to get out of contracts once they realize they kind of got the Fooly Magooly treatment, there's so many constraints that might also cost them money, if they choose to not stay.
Yeah, and I don't know. You might know the specific rule. Oh, I don't think it's a rule, but for a lot of these players, they have to be going back to taking Sierra Burdick around media day.
Hmm.
She had already signed her contract in Italy, and I think a big part, or not a big part, but an important part of those contracts that these athletes sign with those international teams is that like you have to report within X days after your season ends.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you're going from your senior year in college, go go go, draft, preseason, you make a roster, you play, and then 2 weeks after that's over, at the longest, I would guess, then you got to hop over
Hmm.
to a brand new country.
Hmm.
You don't speak the language, you're meeting new teammates. Hopefully your Wi-Fi is set up. Hopefully your bank they can pay you where you need to be paid, but it's like what a whirlwind of a year.
And again, if you add anything on top of that, FIBA, FIBA Worlds, Olympics, any of that, Sierra plays 3-on-3, like all of these things that are just compounded, right? That are just incredible. And we haven't even started to think about our folks that are caring for their elders or have kids or a partner or like businesses,
Mhm.
like all these different ways, right? If we just look at it as people, as the people that would be in our own communities, in our own lives, and think about like
Mhm.
what we're asking them to do and the kind of ways this labor has been invisible for so long, it just becomes really important. It's like, how could you not root for them to win, right?
Mhm.
But then you get there and you see the actual product, despite all this, despite playing year round, despite the conditions they find themselves in, like the way that they're able to ball out will never not be astounding to me.
Yeah, when you stop and think about it, it's incredibly impressive. It already was impressive, right?
Yeah.
Just being the best of the best, but doing it against like such not insurmountable odds, right? There, it's not insurmountable, but like just so much working against you. When you think as a professional athlete, there would be way less barriers to performing your job, playing your sport.
Yeah.
But you brought up another really good point: rooting. Who are you rooting for this season?
You know,
I love a transition. I love a
yeah.
transition.
So okay, so here's y'all don't know me. I am pretty staunch in my support for a team. Like I root for all my I'm pretty much a purist in that I root for all of my home teams, right? Um
Yeah, because she got on this call wearing a Dallas Mavericks hoodie, and I was,
I want it to be more
I'm,
appropriate to the moment what we're talking about.
yeah,
Um
but it's also Dallas as well. Oh boy.
you
Okay,
weren't even worried
continue. I'm
about
sorry.
like the men's sport. You were like,
No,
Dallas, really?
Dallas. Nah.
Um,
Mm,
I'm from
mm, mm.
DeSoto, Texas. I root for all the Dallas teams. I have rescinded my support of the Dallas Cowboys for my own mental and physical health. I did that probably about 5 to 6 years ago, and I've been so much better. I think my blood pressure, everything is like regulated. I don't root against the Cowboys, but they've just harmed me in these really, really awful ways. Anyway, but so it's funny, like, but I'm not a Dallas Wings fan, and I'll tell you why. I root for them. I love them. I think the merch is bomb. Part of me wishes I could jump on, but the Wings did not exist in my entire time growing up in Dallas, Texas. If you don't know about the Wings and their history, the Wings are the artists formerly known as the Tulsa Shock, which are the artists formerly known as the Detroit Shock. And so by the time they made their way to Dallas, that just was not where I was at. And I had already worked for the Los Angeles Sparks, which is the team that I have claimed since emerging in my WNBA fandom. And I was living in Los Angeles at the time. It was my kind of tie to Los Angeles. I don't root for any of the other teams in LA. And it's just like one of those things that was just like a moment of like, I chose this team rather than the other teams kind of chose me because I'm from there.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I'm saying all of this to preface the fact that I'm about to rescind my Sparks fandom. I've loved that franchise. I've worked with those folks. I have deep feelings about it. But I will say that it's a new era. It's a new time. And I realize that if you're the kind of person that picks your fandom based off players, this is a really fun league for you. I'm going to kind of slide into that role as much as I critique those folks. And I'm going to announce here for the first time that I am going to be a Seattle Storm fan as of the 2024 season. I live in Portland. I'll be going up to a lot of the Seattle games. Nneka Ogwumike is my favorite player in the WNBA. And it just feels right. It feels right. That's where I'm at.
I will be joining you on that train, midnight train to Seattle. It was always hard for me to be a Sparks fan because that was a Houston Comets rival.
Yeah.
So I wasn't like, I was like, oh, Sparks, but like Nneka's a homie. Got to root. Then Shanae was a homie and she was on team too. But yeah, I'm ready. And then hopefully it's a long ways off or like it comes whenever Nneka is ready for it. But like once Nneka and Shanae are done in the W, I don't know who I'll be rooting for if the Comets aren't back.
I love the Aces. And that team is just fun. I rock with that team. I think that what they are doing to bring the sport up, legally and illegally, are very important. And so, yeah.
All right, let's talk about that really quick. Not the legal or illegal part, but just like people who are new to the W, where can they be drawing their attention? So we have Seattle. So if you're a Houston or a Texas person and want to root for someone from Houston, Texas, you're a millennial and want to root from someone from Houston, Texas, your age, root for the Seattle Storm, storied franchise. Or if you're someone who misses the Seattle Supersonics, you can root for the Seattle Storm. That's going to be a fun franchise.
You have Skylar Diggins-Smith there now. Jewel Lloyd is always back in the WNBA. Incredibly fun to watch. I think, again, people use the super team term in the W in a way that I think we have to define on our own terms. But I think watching them play together will be such a joy. I'm so excited to switch over. I got to work on my merch game. I got to figure out all my stuff. But I think I'm really excited to see how they gel together. It seems like there's like some veteran leadership wise. I think that matters a lot for teams, and for all the reasons that we've named. And I just think that they're going to hold it down. So yeah, I think if you're trying to find your fandom, you can go off. I think you're starting to talk about some important stuff, like going off of maybe who went to your school that you loved watching ball out. I think that college to W pipeline, hometown love. I think that matters a lot too. Would you say there's any, and I think the teams also have personality that's pretty consistent in terms of like, and rivalries, I think that are pretty consistent that I think might be worth kind of looking at. What would you say, how would you describe someone that's like a Phoenix Mercury fan? What's the average like Mercury fan like? Besides the fact though, they have to hate Los Angeles and the Sparks. That's like a prereq.
Is it rude to say stuck in the past, needs to move on? Oh,
I think that could be appropriate. Do you want to say more as to why?
Well, let me say this. That's part of it. If you're looking for a team that, like, honestly might be trying to recapture some of their like early 2000s glory, right? You had Diana Taurasi win a few championships with that team. You had Brittany Griner come in and win a championship with that team. Diana Taurasi is older now and like had to miss a season a few years ago due to a back injury. Brittany Griner was obviously being detained in Russia, has made her return to the WNBA. But last season they had like a high school coach as their head coach, and that was a failed experiment. They have a new ownership group. They have a new head coach. So it's like, let's return to form, see if we can send Diana Taurasi, if she's going out on a good note. That's my assumption, since the All-Star game will be in Phoenix and they're doing an All-Star game during the Olympic break anyway.
Yeah.
But I think if you want to see a team that's kind of like, maybe not like an underdog, because they've been great players, but like a team trying to get it back together.
Yeah.
Phoenix could be an interesting watch.
Yeah. They also get Tasha Cloud coming into the season, which I think will be interesting too. I'm curious about what the Mercury will look like. It's just like the Sparks to me is like the immediate hater. I mean, this is like one of the most heated kind of I could say energy, I think. When I think about some of those games and some of the ones that got chippy, I think Sparks, Mercury, the fan bases even had a little energy, and then obviously, you know, Sparks links because of those finals that were pretty legendary.
It'll also be interesting to see Kalia Copper and Sophie Cunningham on the same team. If you
the race war. If you the sell is if you enjoyed the race wars of the 2023 and 2024 March Madness tournaments, do I have some games for you?
Ooh boy. If you just Google Sophie Cunningham, Kalia Copper, just Google that, and like you should get the picture, right?
Yeah, the meme, like the iconic.
You should get the meme. Yeah. What do you think about, let's say, New York Liberty?
Okay, so here's the thing about the Liberty. If you are someone, I think the Liberty are in a moment where the super team term has been used for them as well. If you are the kind of person that there are these men that I've seen in the wild, and they have these tattoos, or sometimes I see it on bumper cars. Like if you are the type to have a tattoo that has the New York Yankees logo, the Los Angeles Lakers logo, and like the Pittsburgh Penguins. You know, like if you are a bandwagoner, if you are just like front runner, you're just going for it, shiny out of. I think. Oh, and they also have like a Cowboys logo. I'm like, regionally, where are you from? You have a Yankees, Lakers, and Cowboys logo. Who are you? If that's you, I say go Liberty. If you are the front runner, they have this twerking elephant mascot. They have a great game production. You have all the stars there for sure. I think that the Liberty are great for someone that if you only, you know, I think they're going to be fun to watch for the near future contender. You know, there's no question. It probably will feel like a stress-free season. What do you think?
I agree. You got some big names there. You got Ellie the Elephant there. She's a great dancer. Shout out to whoever's in that suit. But yeah, I think that'll be very, very low stress season to enjoy. You know, they're going to put up, well, the WNBA, they're doing 40 games this season. So, you know, they're going to probably put up at least 28, 30 wins. Mm-hmm. So that should be a good time. You know who we didn't talk about, but we kind of talked about abandoning them? The Los Angeles Sparks.
Like it's a good time to jump ship. Why is it a good time to become a Sparks fan? Maybe we can, in our exit interview here, maybe we can offer what is exciting and what the potential of the Sparks could be.
It would be hard to get worse.
We're not selling it well.
Okay. Cameron Brink.
Mm-hmm.
Cameron Brink from Stanford is going to be there. Rakia Jackson from Tennessee will be there.
I do love her.
Kurt Miller's a good coach.
Yeah,
he's a good coach. It's like, I don't know if he can get a team over the hump, like to a ring, but I think going back to the conversation about like how short of a schedule, a timeline you have to go from college player, top dog college player, to trying to earn a roster spot in the WNBA is short. I think it was maybe Devereaux Peters that was on Twitter talking about like how some of these girls like can't read a play, can't make these calls and things on the go, like don't know how to run a set. Like, I think Kurt Miller is this is just like from the outside looking in, right? Like, I think he can help rookies. There are some coaches who've been in the league who I don't know about like currently in the league that like I would be worried about their ability to develop and nurture players, especially again, given that short timeline. Like, I hope Chicago Sky does well. I hope Teresa Weatherspoon does well. Yeah. We'll talk about them in a second, but that's a first year coach. A first year coach with first year players going from, I mean, she was a WNBA player, a great WNBA player, but if you're coming from all of the resources and access you have with an NBA franchise to a WNBA franchise, it's also going to be an adjustment for her. I feel like the Sparks are actually going to be pretty fun. Like maybe not this year, but in a couple years,
Yeah.
because I feel like they have like a lot of players that on their previous rosters or in their previous roles were like the second, third, maybe fourth option. And somebody has to figure out who's going to be the first option.
Yeah.
Here, hopefully Kurt Miller works it out. Hopefully those players work it out and like have a good competitive season. And maybe even, I don't know. I don't know what they're allowed to do during the All-Star break or the Olympic break, but like if they're not on a team, maybe they can use that time to like continue all the teams, but like teams with new coaches and new rosters can like use that time to kind of retool and adjust.
So I'm hearing that the cell is the ceiling. I mean, there's so much potential. It's like
There's so much
if
potential.
you enjoy like fixer uppers, if you enjoy watching flip shows on HGTV, the Sparks might be your gal. That might be the one you need to be dancing with. I like this. I like this cell. I think also just think about history and franchise, I think matters too. Is like I think there's something so incredible about the history of the Sparks. I think that we got to live through like an incredible era with Elena Beard, Chelsea Gray. Like it was just like a time, a moment in history of just shooters shooting lights out. It was just incredible to watch them against like a Lynx team that just felt indestructible. And I don't know, I feel like when I talk about the W, I get so excited for folks that are jumping in and can dive in and have like the moments and the memes and learn about these histories, and also to like get to see what the future is for all the new players that are coming in. Because I don't know if you, I know that you were looking at this kind of meme that kind of went across the players during the tournament where they were like, what was your welcome to the WNBA moment? Did you see some of these?
Yes.
And people are pulling out receipts. A lot of it is like people being bullied by Diana Taurasi is like a key theme before. Yes. Like being physically battered by Diana Taurasi on the court, which is just iconic. But, all these other moments where you were really good in college and then you realize the step up, right? Again, that super tight, short window. But everyone has a story of like, these are the folks that were the stars on their high school teams, that were stars of their college team. Like to make it to this point, to be on this roster, there were so many steps they had to go through. And this is really the best that we have, right? This is the height of the sport. And yet the humbling that will come. I mean, you're going to see it happen to someone that you thought was perfect in college or someone that you thought was just like, they're going to be plug and play. Whenever people are like, she's ready for, people are saying this about Juju right now. She's ready for the league now. And I'm like, okay, you got to get in the gym. Yeah. The charges hit different in the W. They are just like your body, the wear and tear. Like, I'm just like, I actually understand there are so many inequalities in this league. I understand why there is not a one and done for the W. First of all, because everyone leaving, y'all are definitely getting cut, right? But like, also the time you need to get in the gym to learn the game, to like up your basketball IQ, to have a coach that's going to work with you and explain that is so important. Because like you said, you have to get in there and you got this iPad and they're just going through all these plays and you're like, what is going on?
Yeah. Math floating around your head meme.
Yes.
X's and O's floating around your head meme.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd be interested. I would love for them to suspend the one and done rule or like the eligibility requirements for the draft, which are you have to be 22 years old, like the year of the draft, or at least turning 22, 4 years removed from high school, la-di-da-di. I would love to see them suspend it for 1 year just so we can, I don't like, not to use somebody as an example, but like, yeah, let somebody come out after like freshman, sophomore year.
Whoa.
And beg to go. I mean, I know
I'm curious. This is provocative. I like this. Do you feel like, so I would say the only ethical way to do that is to first have expansion. You have to have 16 teams, I think, to do that, like without it being morally just reprehensible to me. But then I think if we did this experiment, without NIL, I think it would be super interesting fact. Without the transfer portal, I think like those things make college more tenable versus I always thought that the eligibility rules for the draft were unfair, first because men didn't have the same one, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then I was like, is it really fair if someone's stuck in a bad program and your choice is to sit out for a year in transferring, which we don't have that, under this current transfer policy with the NCAA. And so the NCAA stepping their game up has allowed folks to make decisions they may have made differently when they weren't able to get money in any other kind of way. They're still doing unpaid labor because the NCAA and their teams are still benefiting off that labor. They're not compensated. They're doing additional labor of influencer work in order to make money. That's a different rant for a different day. But I do think NIL transfer portal make it a little bit better in terms of what they're able to do and navigate. And I think now it's exciting because we're seeing the NIL girlies able to bring the bags they made in college and help supplement their life versus there was a time where I didn't know under the previous CBA, not the current one with the current minimums and maximums, but under the old one, I did not know how folks lived in LA or New York, honestly, with the money that they got paid, right? And you're moving somewhere and you're like, I'm actually here for the summer and then I have to go move to Russia. So these are folks not even signing 12-month leases. And so I think about this new generation with different money, with a better CBA, with expansion. Yeah, I say we do it. Let's just test it out and see.
Let them be able to do it like LeBron James, where it's like, I'm declaring for the draft, and I'm also going to the transfer portal, but I also might go back to USC.
Oh,
just let them
little Bronny.
little Bronny. Let them just do that.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, they don't get drafted. If teams aren't willing to take the risk, they just go back, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. I do like that policy.
Let's see. Who else do we have? Atlanta.
Okay. What is our sell for Atlanta? Correct me if you find this to be incorrect, incompatible. I feel like the Atlanta Dream and the Washington Mystics have a similar style of fan base. I'm saying if you're trying to make your determination, if you find yourself on the East Coast in that region and that's your vibe, I do think there's some regional specificity for our kind of mid-Atlantic and our southern folks on East Coast time. What Pimp C say, when he gets off the plane, he's got to change his watch. He said Atlanta's not the South. I disagree with that. Those are not my thoughts, just merely one of Pimp C of UGK. But I do think Dream fans can be excited about an ownership group that is not Trumpian. I think they can be excited about the kind of fresh energy. I think there's fresh energy and investment in the Dream right now that could be interesting. I will say that if I were choosing between the Dream and the Mystics, I've always kind of liked the Mystics as an organization, but I am staunchly a Western Conference fanatic. I feel like all the teams I really love watching have historically been in the Western Conference, and so Eastern Conference to me is always feels like who I'm rooting against.
Two things, maybe three. One, speaking of the Mystics, let's get some Mystics vintage gear, old logo, old color scheme. Let's do that. I would love that. Two, I agree with you on the Mystics Atlanta Dream, kind of having similar vibes. I can see that. Although the Mystics do have 2 championships, at least one. And yeah, they can and then the Dream can celebrate not having, that Kelly Loeffler lady in ownership and having a player as part of the ownership group, which is really cool. So that's something care about maybe the business side of things. The Mystics are still with Monument Sports Group or is it Monumental? Monumental. Atlanta has a pretty good ownership group and good resource for players. And when they match up, you'll get to see Tina Charles, new team, old team. West Coast versus East Coast. The only East Coast team I like is the Indiana Fever.
Oh, I guess we should talk about them. They have someone I guess people know that's going to be playing there this season.
Here is this team is going to be fun. This will be a fun team for people who I guess Iowa is one thing. Like to see rivals become, or idols become rivals become. What is it? What's the rap line?
No, you're not asking me to rap. Not on this program.
Anyway, it's just Aaliyah Boston, Caitlin Clark, former rivals, now partners. It's the making of like a Disney Channel original movie.
Mm.
And that should be a fun team. If you think Caitlin Clark is going to take 30 shots a game, you are mistaken. There's always a question if there's enough air in the ball. And with some of her teammates, maybe not. Maybe not. But that should be that's fun. Like that's an organization. If you want to see another organization like return to its glory days or like actually have a chance of doing that, Indiana is a good team to watch. And it's like Hoosier basketball. Y'all love that.
Yeah. No, it's got a certain caucasity to it that I think will fit right in with the Iowa aesthetic. I think that works. I think one of the things about Indiana, I will say I've been to Indianapolis once, and I love the spirit of Indianapolis. I actually think that I think it's a great city to support that team, honestly. And I kind of love already how it's kind of being set up and thought about and really taken seriously. Do I wish that it had happened before all of this? Like, it would be great for someone like Caitlin Clark to walk into a franchise that has already been thinking bigger and better, right? And so, I kind of rebuke this notion of Caitlin Clark or random men deciding to watch Saving Women's Basketball, right? That's like the undercurrent of like, wow, we're watching now, so it matters. It's on sports. It's like rather than acknowledging that, like the Kaplan report is really the impetus for all of this. The fact that you got called out. Again, this idea of bullying works. Sedona Prince being like, this is sexist and I'm about to show the world on TikTok is actually what we need to be thinking about. When you think about the fact that Dawn Staley wrote a letter the day after that drop that outlined all of these other issues that were happening at the tournament. We have to think about the fact that coaches and players who are preparing to play in the midst of a pandemic had to take extra time out to advocate for themselves and for their athletes, which is wild. And that led to all of these other things, all this other fallout that required the NCAA to be held accountable in a way that it hasn't been held accountable before. So they could use terms like March Madness to describe what was happening, right? Only for us to get to Portland, and they couldn't even get the 3-point line correct, right? Like, this is what we're kind of up against. And we're still seeing the game, despite all of this, played at this highest level. So I want to encourage folks, if you're picking a team, to kind of think about the fact that all this has happened to these folks before they get to the league, where they're playing against folks that are ready to welcome them with open arms and fists into this space.
I'm like, yeah, I'm just
they are ready to be welcomed in their moment. That's like, you are here. But I do think it matters when we I know we do it very tongue-in-cheek here, but when we talk about like this kind of history with former ownership, it does mean a lot for Renee Montgomery. As much as we pick on her on the internet, it does matter a lot that she is in this ownership group. This is history, right? So to think about like the everything that happened in 2020, right? We're still seeing a league growing and expanding. And so, the thing I like to think about when you're picking your team, we're not making comparisons to like, if you follow this team in the NBA or you follow this team here, like, because it's different, it's like, I don't compare them because the NBA has been around for 100 years. Like, there's just something so different about a new emerging league that's still finding its way and branding itself and navigating so much that it is like, all these things do matter, these histories, who still needs a championship, who's still trying to get on the board. I think that stuff does matter. And so I want to just kind of validate what you said of like, folks you can be really, really excited about. And so I don't know. I'm excited for the season because I think that new, fresh kind of breath of air of all of these, Aaliyah Edwards, so excited. There's just all these folks that are just going to be like, they're going to have their moment and they will be welcomed. And then I think they're going to be better for it. I mean, I'm just so excited to watch them meld and mold and then see them play with folks. Ariel Atkins, I'm just thinking about the Mystics now, like one of my favorite WNBA players. And I just feel like it's going to be just really interesting to see like how everything gels this season or doesn't. Sometimes that's fun too.
I love drama. Speaking of teams that need to get on the board, Connecticut Sun.
Who should be a fan of the Sun?
God's strongest soldiers only.
I think that the cheat code people always say is if you're a UConn fan, it's like a pretty easy transition. I think they do a good job of doing more of a cross promotion,
Mm-hmm.
with a college than anyone else. If you're a Mo Jefferson fan, if you're a UConn fan, like, you can be excited about that. They play in a casino. I think I think they have a little vibe going on there. And I want to end my positivity there because I think that's all that I might have in this moment. It's a good kind of potential. Are we saying still kind of like upside? Like, if you're choosing upside as your reason, like you want to be on the ground floor.
Yes. You take good cop, I'll be bad cop, in that this team always gets there
Mm-hmm.
and then never can finish and bring home the championship. And that's going back since we were in LA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
2018. They just keep running up against walls, I guess, like with a few different iterations of the roster. But yeah, if you're a UConn fan, maybe I guess like the tri-state area, if that's what's called,
Mm-hmm.
you can get up there. If you hate New York teams,
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a good
you
way to
can root
be
for the yeah.
proximity. Into
Yeah, you can
yeah.
root for the Connecticut Sun. They're good, but to me, it's just like I've not bet on them. I would love to be wrong. I would love to
Mm.
see Dewana Bonner has a championship, but like Alyssa Thomas win a championship. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I would love that for her. I would love that for that organization. Also, it's just really cool. Another cool thing you mentioned casinos because they're owned by a native tribe,
Mm-hmm.
the Mohegan tribe,
Mm-hmm.
and that's also like just a cool fact, I guess. So that's Connecticut. Hopefully they can get over the hurdle at some point. I don't know if it'll happen this year with this current roster, but we got 3 teams left. Minnesota Lynx.
The Lynx are. I'm trying to think of how I would stereotype like a Lynx fan because it has changed, right? Um, from the previous teams of your, like it's a little different than the Maya Moore era Lynx for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Simone Augustus Lynx, like, it's a little different, but I feel like they're always a contender. Like, I don't think we can count them out in the way that maybe when we're talking about a team like the Sun. The Sun will make a grimy playoff run sometime, and you're like, they are holding this together with toothpicks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus the Lynx are just a solid franchise in terms of this is a franchise that has invested for so long in building their relationship to the city. They are, when I say perennial, it's like they sell out constantly. They will
Mm-hmm.
have had multiple, and again, I'm speaking, I know, perhaps a little dated in terms of the previous era, but just in terms of their marketing, I just saw them approach the game so differently. And I think, they walked so that the Indiana Fever can run. Like, I really think that they built out a consistent, like, jam-packed, had the fan base, had folks invested, and then also spent and invested in the front office that could get them those championships. So, and get
Mm-hmm.
them consistently as a finals potential. So I say that in terms of like they are going to be sturdy regardless because I think they just have the
Yeah,
foundation. They're like a foundationally good franchise. Is that fair?
that's very fair. And I don't really have anything to add to that. I was going to say it was like Midwest, like a Midwest grit.
Mm.
Yeah, Minnesota Lynx still be in the mix. Cheryl Reeve, I think she is out there, but she knows what she's doing.
Out there how?
Just like she's a lot as a coach.
Mm-hmm.
Like a hoot and hollering, throwing my jacket, throwing my
Yeah, yeah,
clipboard.
yeah. She doesn't.
She's a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah.
I've never enjoyed watching that. Watching coaches do that.
Mm-hmm.
I've never enjoyed playing for coaches who did that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the Minnesota Lynx will be in the mix for sure. So we have 2 more. Let's go to your hometown. I know we talked about them earlier, but we didn't really kind of talk about what to look for or like why you should root for them in 2024 and beyond. Um, what are you
Um.
thinking?
So I think I'll talk a little bit about the Wings rosters. I think a little bit of their allure
Mm-hmm.
in terms of if you are not from Dallas and you're looking for a reason to root for them. I think you might remember Arike Ngubawale. I think Arike, if you remember those epic clutch shots in the tournament when she was at Notre Dame, I think that might be a reason of like the excitement that I think that she very much brings to the game. If you are a U of O fan and you remember Satu Sabali, again, incredibly automatic, incredible teammate, played at the U of O with Sabrina and Ruthie. She was part of that kind of big three on those kind of title efforts. The one that I think they would have won in 2020 had there been a tournament. If you want to kind of see that kind of crew, that good connection, I think Maddie Siegrist is really exciting. I think is a great player. Enjoyed watching Maddie at AU. And so anyway, I actually like their squad. I like their roster. They got Kalani Brown. I think they have a crew. One of the things that's also kind of fun for me is people's trajectories as players to coaches. That could be interesting. The Lynx do a lot of hiring of former W players, iconic college players. And I think that's also part of their system that I really respect and love. Courtney Paris is one of the assistant coaches for the Wings, which is kind of fun if you are of a certain age and was in college in a certain age. Remember the Paris twins. I think that's kind of fun. And I kind of think as a franchise that's newer, and again, I'm using newer in that kind of trajectory through cities, I think the Wings always have that kind of potential and are really fun. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that team puts together because they got shooters on that team.
They do. They have a good roster. Mm-hmm. They have a good roster. And I don't know if we've even talked about her like personally, but Ashley Owusu, she started her career at Maryland, right?
I think so.
Maryland.
And then she was at Penn State, yeah.
Yeah. And maybe she had another stop in between as well. Sorry, I didn't look this up before. But like, I don't know if she'll make the roster. I would love if she could. She did Maryland, Virginia Tech, and Penn State. And those are all three really good programs. And she entered the draft this year, was picked up by the Wings. I would love to see, like, maybe this will be working with Courtney Paris, with the head coach, Latricia Trammell, working with Enrique, Maddie, all those other folks. Like, can she develop into a player and kind of like, I don't know if redemption arc is like the right term, because I don't know the circumstances, like what caused her to lead, but I know what's reputation it's given her. And like, can she change that? Is she interested in changing that? Does she care? Yeah. So yeah, Dallas Wings, I think that'll be a fun team. I put money on it. They'll win a championship for the Cowboys.
Well, that's easy.
All right, next team.
Wow.
One for the road, Courtney. Chicago Sky.
Did we did the Aces? We did the Aces.
We kind of talked about them. We can talk about them more.
Talk about them more.
Okay.
We talked about facilities and them doing their own thing. Yeah, we talked about them. That's enough. Yeah. Okay, sorry.
All good. Chicago Sky. Do you have a nickname for Angel Reese? Any alliteration for Chicago Barbie?
Yeah, she did Shy Barbie, and I just wasn't into that. I just feel like she deserves a little more. But I'm also terrible at titles and nicknames, so I'm like the worst person for this, because I actually spent a little time, like I was going to come up with this perfect thing and was going to be the originator of her next nickname. But I don't know. I was thinking... It's definitely, if we go Chi-Town something, like cutie is gross, you know? Like I was thinking about like C alliterations aren't the best. I feel like we got to wait for it to come naturally. I think we're forcing it, whereas Bayou Barbie just kind of just happened to us and we were just like, yeah, that's it. I have nothing good to offer here. I'm going to keep thinking about it. Angel, if you're listening, just know I haven't given up. I just had to reset. I think that it's such a great marketing, branding match for her in Chicago. I think it's going to be magical.
It's going to be fun. And you know who's also on that roster? Kennedy Carter.
Why do you do this?
But it's Kennedy Carter and Diamond DeShields.
I love Diamond. I love Diamond so much.
I like Diamond. They have like a lot of kind of random pieces. And I don't know how that's going to translate. Kennedy Carter, Diamond DeShields, Dana Evans, Kaiser, I don't know how to say your last name, Marina Mabry, who I enjoy, Michaela Onyenwere, and then, of course, Camila Cardoso and Angel Reese. Yeah, I don't know what those lineups will look like, but it'll be fun with the rookies. So, and then Therese Weatherspoon, maybe this is for people who were like old school WNBA fans and fell off. Therese Weatherspoon's back. She had to hit the shot against the Comets in the WNBA finals one year, and thought we had in the bag. But that roster is very interesting, but I hope Teresa Weatherspoon has success. Again, we talk about like former WNBA players as coaches, as assistant coaches, as owners. Would love to see like another former player have success like Becky Hammon. I don't know if she's been like put into the same kind of position as Becky Hammon was, like a team already on the cusp. They're only a few years removed from a championship, the Chicago Sky, but very, very different roster, ton of turnover. So
can we just briefly, for the folks that haven't listened to the episode about Kennedy, to maybe just quickly also use this as a case study of like why we need really great WNBA media coverage, not just the games being accessible, but also folks to tell us what's going on the business side of the game, free agency, training camps, all of that. Because I think if you're coming into the W and you have been a fan of other leagues that are covered by a lot of different people in very in-depth ways, you might find yourself having questions as to why someone, for example, isn't playing, why we haven't heard from them, why they are kind of being disappeared by their franchise. And you might be wondering what journalists will help us understand this information, right? And so, one of the things that I think sports journalism has been accused of is kind of just being this PR department for teams and leagues, right? There's this mutual relationship. ESPN is making these narratives and stories and allowing these men in suits to yell at each other about sports so that we then watch the sports they have the broadcast rights for. It's this very like mutually beneficial arrangement. This goes back to newspapers and the relationship between telling people what's going on in sports to making people buy papers, right? So I'm with specifically thinking about Kennedy Carter's story. If you look her up, you might be curious. You start finding out she has these incredible stat lines, both here in the US and overseas. And then you have the idea of what it means for her stepping away from the game. And I think if there was an equivalent I could make in the NBA of like having such a dynamic, game-changing player that is benched inexplicably for large periods of time, and eventually kind of pushed out of the league and then returning, there are just so many questions as to what happened, right? And so I think that people typically blame athletes when they don't know the story and say, oh, this person was difficult to work with. They violated team rules or they did X, Y, Z. But what Carter's case really represents for me is the ways that folks that have been very investigative and thorough have been pushed out of WNBA media spaces, whereas folks that are rah-rah and just hype folks are the folks that get a lot of access. And so I think there's a way that I would like us to continue to hold. I mean, I think the episode we did was our kind of bullying effort of like, people have to be accountable. But, I also want to encourage folks if there are things that you think are important that aren't covered, or the ways we might see the same 5 players highlighted when there's a range of players we need to be supporting and watching in this game. I think there's enough signature shoe to go around. I think there's enough coverage and hype, but also the ways that we hold teams and leagues accountable as well. And so I kind of mentioned the aces, but I think that, one of the things that we have to think about is like, what kind of league do we want this to be? I want players to be able to speak their minds and let us know what's going on. I also want, if teams are doing things like promising players one thing and not following through, or telling players that they're protected and if they're pregnant and they're not, if we're still thinking about a league that's treating pregnancy as an injury, then, as a way to push someone out of a team or not see their value, I think we have issues. But I also think that when you look up the Kennedy Carter stuff, you might have more questions than answers. We don't have the answers either. But I just think it's important. And so again, bullying works. I think if you look back at some of the stuff that the WNBA has done with All-Star, you've been to All-Star, you have great insight. But,
Mm-hmm.
some of the things that have happened, I think part of being a knowledgeable fan right now is also knowing like where that accountability has to be. So I think one of the things I encourage, no matter what team you're picking, is like to kind of use Kennedy as an example of like, what we have to be vigilant about as fans, because unfortunately we don't always have the media, in our corner to ask those questions in press conferences or to really push the issue. And a lot of stuff gets then kind of swept under the rug in a really problematic way.
I agree with everything you're saying. Do you think that's a symptom of it being a new league? Do you think that will come? Or do you think maybe that's something that already should have probably been part of the process?
I think that there's a culture that's developed, and I don't know the reason why. I think
Mm-hmm.
that it has been cemented early enough where I think we could still fix it. I'm not sure who decided, it's people that act like this is a charity narrative of like, we should just be grateful for anyone writing about this league. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe we should get some people that actually know what they're talking about. Right. And so, when you're pursuing like, where you're going to get information, I think that there's always like local reporters, sometimes it might be only one person per team, like covers a team locally that really cares, right? So finding those folks, but then also the fan communities is actually where I find some of the best work is happening. If you follow folks like the committee on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it today, I think that you find fan communities are asking these questions. They want to know where merch is. They are asking why All Star is being set up in a way that is haphazard at best. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think when I see how knowledgeable fans are of this sport versus when I go to other leagues and I'm sitting in the stands listening to people talk behind me and I'm like, you don't even watch the national games. It sounds like y'all just watch highlights, right? And then you come into a fan base that because they've had to fight for every bit of coverage, they are so knowledgeable. They have so much to offer. You see people with all these trading cards that have been signed. They walk into the arena, they have tattoos of like team logos. Like there's all this way that the fans have this maturity about them and their knowledge and what they want to see and do. But then the league has this way of either turning away people that are asking the right questions, which then makes other folks say, it kind of creates a culture of silence, right? Where other folks are seeing stuff and not saying stuff. Stuff is easily
Mm-hmm.
swept under the rug, and stuff that even when I would find out about stuff later from players sometimes, I would be shocked at how good the WNBA's headquarters are of sweeping certain things under the rug. And so I think it's not so much that it's a newer league, like hasn't had enough years, but it's a newer league that has emerged in a time where media was rapidly transforming and they were trying to have full
Mm-hmm.
control over the narrative, right? And so the players that get promoted, when people are complaining about, why certain players get more promotion and opportunities and shoe endorsements and all this stuff, it's because they've seen for years how certain players, right? How Black you are, how queer you are, all these things really matter in terms of how the league's going to talk about you. That starts to shape the narrative in a particular way. And so I think we have to, I guess our kind of marching orders are to keep pushing back, keep asking questions, and then try to force the hand of our media folks to do the same. Because I think that's the only way it changes.
I love that. I can't imagine the WNBA, or I'm sorry, I can't imagine like NBA Twitter being worse.
Mhm.
But like if it was brand new, it probably would be. Not that WNBA Twitter is bad, but I'm just thinking about like the parallels and like the
Mhm.
coverage and how it's discussed and how communities have been
Yeah.
built. Courtney, I didn't mean for this episode to take this long, but what parting words do you have for people who are just tuning into the WNBA this season or maybe returning after a long break?
One, welcome. Glad you're here. I hope you stay. There's so much good here. Two, find your team, pick your poison, find some fans to talk trash with. It's an incredible community of fans as well, of players that are accessible, players that are really looking forward to the growth of this league too. And then third, I would just say like the game is better than it's ever been, but it's been good for a while. And so again, I don't buy into any of these scarcity logics or these logics that say there is a limit to what this league can be. I just think that your support is not a charity. It's not empowerment feminism. It's not, I'm just like, like that's not going to keep folks. What I think will keep folks is folks like actually watching, and actually seeing how good the product is, how great the drama is, how people get on Instagram after the games. All of it is part of it. So let it just wash over you. I'm so excited you're here. Feel free to hit and either one of us up with all of your hot takes. I love people's hot takes about the W. And I think with such a condensed league, like to have so few teams, it just gives you a chance to get really fully immersed with everything happening. So welcome. It's overwhelming. It's a lot. Everything's going to happen really quickly over the next few weeks, but it's going to be a ride worth going on.
Woo, woo. Courtney, can you tell us anything about your book before we sign off?
Sure. My book is titled Double Crossover: Gender, Media, and Politics in Global Basketball. It is a book that considers all the things we've been talking about, starting with the WNBA's 2020 season, kind of marked by both protest and pandemic, to moving to how players translate their labor overseas, to thinking about new leagues emerging like Athletes Unlimited, to thinking about how the NCAA has changed since the Kaplan Report was published. And so I think about all these things and more in my book. I talk to athletes. I watch them do their thing. I consume a lot of their media. And I kind of came up with this project because I just had questions I was trying to answer that I couldn't find answers to elsewhere. So that book will be out in spring 2025. So hopefully in March. I hope we can do it around March Madness time. But I'm really excited to share that book. It's been a long time. It started in 2015, all the way up to literally last week. And so I think I'm really ready to let it go. But I also think it's such an exciting time to put this out in case there are folks that want to just read up and learn more and have questions about how labor works and how media works within women's basketball. So glad you're here. We'll have more for you. This book is my love letter to basketball, as well as a pamphlet, maybe my manifesto of like how these athletes deserve the world.
Well, can't wait to have you back for your book tour. I mean, you're always welcome to come back before, but like for your book tour for sure. And then that's it. Courtney, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge. It's always so fun to talk with you about basketball, to exchange texts during games, during drafts, whatever's happening. It's always so fun. And to do it in this format is also a pleasure, so we can share with other people, because some things I wouldn't share my screenshots from the things I say.
Me either. This is the good wholesome version. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Y'all, thanks for listening. That Can't Be Right. You can check me out at TCBR Pod on Twitter. Well, I guess Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, thatcan'tberightpod@gmail.com. Leave a review, tell a friend. If you want to join my WNBA fantasy league, let me know. If you want to take me to a game, let me know. I'm not picky about seats, but my tradition at Sparks games was to have a margarita. If I need a new tradition was it Climate Pledge Arena, I'm open to your ideas. And that's it. Go basketball, go sports.
Sports.
What just happened?